Hola, buenas tardes para todos. Gracias por acompañarnos una vez más en Azure en el bar, en esta nueva edición de Gold Edition. Bueno, como todos saben, esto es una iniciativa que surge con la idea de juntar a la comunidad de Latinoamérica con Microsoft Corp, que junto a Javier Villegas, Cristóbal Ibarra, Gastón Cruz y yo, Alex Rostán, y bueno, y el apoyo de todos los colegas y MVP de la comunidad de LATAM, hacemos que esto sea realidad. En esta edición tenemos un invitado de super lujo como Rohan Kumar, Vice President Azure Data en Microsoft. Y bueno, la verdad que es un lujo y un placer poder tenerlo a él aquí, que nos acompañe y bueno, espero que puedan ir acompañándonos en el chat, ir trasladando algunas de las inquietudes que tengan. Intentaremos a la medida de lo posible ir trasladando las inquietudes y hacer esto un poco más de ida y vuelta y que no sea un monólogo. Así que bueno, con todo lo anterior, como ya saben, ahora vamos a cambiar a inglés para tener una interacción mejor con Rohan. Y bueno, espero que lo disfruten y nos vemos en un ratito que para mí luego poder volver con ustedes. Hello Rohan, good evening, welcome to Azure in el Bar. Thank you for the company and give us to spend some time today with you. It's really a pleasure to have you here and let me introduce what Azure in the Bar is. It's an initiative was born as a group of friends from different countries in LATAM, looking a way to continue sharing and connecting with the community. And okay, finally, for those who don't know me, my name is Alex Rostan. I'm an Uruguayan lost in the world, now living in Paraguay. I work as a country manager of Arcano Paraguay, a regional Microsoft partner company, and I am a business applications MVP. And that's my short story. So please, Javier, introduce yourself.
Thank you, Alex. Well, Javier Villegas here from Buenos Aires, Argentina. Same as my friends, super happy and excited to host this Gold Edition with Rohan Kumar. A little bit about myself. I work at Mediterranean Shipping Company, and I'm also a Microsoft MVP in Data Platform. I'm a member of the PAS community as well as here the local community group in Argentina. So I really look forward to have some fun today and learn from Rohan. Thank you for being here. Cristobal?
Thank you, Javier. Hello, everybody. I'm so excited. I'm very happy stay here and grateful to be with you again in this version of new chapter of Azure in the Bar. I live in Chile, work as digital data and analytics manager for Ernst & Young. In addition to that, I actively participate in the PAS Chile community and also collaborate in the Power BI user group, where we are already more than 3,000 users. I'm very grateful for being able to collaborate with the LATAM community. From now on, I hope you have fun today. So please, Gaston, introduce yourself.
Hey everyone, I'm really excited about this interview with another Gold Edition. I'm gonna do just a quick intro for myself. My name is Gaston Cruz. I'm a Microsoft Data Platform MVP from since 2017. It's a long time. It's a solution. I'm working right now as a solution principal within Slalom, United States, and I'm running in the team of Microsoft Center of Excellence, architecting kind of data platform solutions in enterprise clients everywhere. Now I'm based out of Seattle. I was talking about this with Rohan, Washington. It's been a kind of rolling coaster for my whole family since we moved here one year and a half ago. So let's switch to Javier to do the kind of the starting point, the conversation, because we have a Rohan waiting for all of us.
All right, thank you. So Rohan, again, thank you so much for accepting our invitation. The LATAM community has this unique opportunity to have the corporate vice president of Azure Data with us. So it's an honor and a pleasure to have you with us. So we would like to start with this informal interview, chat, discussion. So we would like to have some fun, as we were saying before. So Rohan, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. First of all, again, thank you, Javier, Alex, Cristobal, and Gaston for inviting me. When Javier sent me the email, I was like, look, I mean, I was just so excited, because, frankly, the way I look at it is, it's like friends like us, right? We sort of, make up the community, and a lot of our work lands up being more fun and impactful because of community members like yourselves and the power that you create. So I'm always eternally very, very thankful, and every opportunity that I get, I love to sort of get down and have conversation in such an informal manner. Just by way of introduction, of course, I lead the Azure data team at Microsoft as the corporate vice president. But my background essentially is I grew up in India and came to the United States almost 22 years ago. Been with Microsoft for that long, and started off with, believe it or not, the core Windows team. I wasn't a data person when I started. My background was in operating systems and networking. So I started off with the Windows team, and it's an interesting story where Bill Gates had this vision. I mean, he was obviously thinking much ahead of our times, where he saw the power of, and SQL Server had, this is, you're talking about early 2000s, had sort of really, started maturing in terms of its capabilities. And the vision Bill had was, can you use the power of a relational database to significantly enhance the user experience for Windows, right? Just in terms of, what eventually, you have capabilities like desktop search, etc. So he essentially thought about that idea at a much more grander scale. So that was my entry into data, where there were certain sort of handpicked engineers from across the company that they asked. I used to be, more on the file system and networking side in Windows, and that's how I got into the SQL Server team. I wasn't a database person, and then so it's fascinating, like when you look back at life, how things happen. And I remember I was like, man, why am I going to this application called database? Like, I'm a systems guy. I should be, but the rest, as they say, is history. I just fell in love with, the database, the data platform pieces, and here we are. I mean, of course, now if you just take a look at how the landscape essentially is expanded, right? I mean, before, if you go, before the whole cloud transition happened, it almost didn't matter what your question was. The answer was SQL Server.
That's good.
That's how we essentially thought about our world. And then, now, of course, SQL in many ways, continues to evolve pretty significantly. It's fascinating to see right now, all the way to what we do with Synapse and SQL running on ARM devices at the edge. And it's such a, modern platform, but, we've expanded, greatly into open source. And NoSQL with Cosmos DB, which is a phenomenal service, and the stuff we are doing around open source operational databases as well. So that's my journey. My background's an engineer, and of course I don't get to write as much code anymore. But I still pride myself of having written some back in the day.
And Rohan, it's good to know that about kind of operating system that you bring, kind of networking and all this stuff. So the next wave is kind of tell us a little bit about this roadmap about Microsoft careers and how everybody can strongly switch careers even within Microsoft. How you switch different teams, and how was your kind of history about that? How was that path in the company?
No, absolutely. It's a fantastic question, And, I remember when I was sort of graduating, from college, for my master's, and Microsoft was like super appealing. This is back in like mid '98, and I remember that I was sort of looking for companies. I remember having seen this thing on the Microsoft website that said, hey, you can come here, be a part of Microsoft, and impact like hundreds of millions of lives in the world. And as a developer, and it said something like, you can think about an idea, code it up overnight, check it in, and there you go. It's a part of Windows or Office or any of these big franchises. So that, I think, inherently attracted me a lot to Microsoft. I was like, man, I mean, you know how it is. I was growing up as a software developer, so the opportunity to have that kind of impact. So I remember, I had like a grueling interviews, one of my hardest interviews and the most technical one, where they were really pushing the boundaries, was with Microsoft. And that was also the exciting part, right? Where you feel like, man, you've achieved something. And so I joined the core operating systems group. I'm sorry. Yes. That's basically how I started. And my focus was, I remember back in the day, internet was sort of a big deal. And so we were, the intention was, how do we take, our investments in file server? If we had the SMB protocol in Windows and saying, okay, if I want to, share stuff over there, I mean, you look at things right now. Back in the day, we were thinking about, do we have a service which is equivalent of, let's say, what's OneDrive today, right? And where if you go back in like Windows XP, I think was the first version of Windows, which has this notion where the save as dialog box allowed you to save to what used to be a web service that was hosted by Microsoft. So that was the very first thing I worked on. But it was interesting, actually, if I look back, that essentially, I had to design this thing where I was designing a remote file system, but I had to rely on user mode components because all the HTTP stack wasn't in the kernel mode at that time. So, and that really, I had to sort of come up with this whole, I remember, device ioctl based design where you had like, you had to make sure deadlocks, etc. were avoided. But that really was the reason why I was picked to the WinFS project, because WinFS was trying to basically marry SQL Server's core engine with the file system, right, to sort of create this whole thing for Windows, which eventually, if you look at file streams inside SQL or file table, that really, the genesis of that was the work that, the team that I was a part of, we had done. And then, I remember sort of coming into WinFS. I mean, it was a phenomenal, it was a very ambitious project technology-wise, but, it was maybe either a little too ahead of its time and in terms of, and even the customer fit, what we realized was the scale at which we were looking at wasn't really all that applicable to the consumer scenario, but file stream came out of it, and file table, SQL Server's entry into unstructured data came out of it. As we thought about full text search, XML indexing, and a lot of that. And then, it's interesting after that, if I reflect back, I've always sort of been very interested in newer experiences. So I grew up as a developer. Then I remember having a conversation with my management chain at that point saying, hey, I want to get a lot more involved in the business and understand like customer requirements. How do we think about, all up? And so I went and sort of did the, in Microsoft, we have program/product managers. So I did that for the SQL Server 2012 release, I think. And then, of course, the cloud thing happened and it expanded. The last 10 years feels like it's just been 6 months.
Yeah. That's right.
So I did multiple roles. But I think one of the key things I always sort of reflect back on is, just having that desire to learn something new, do something new, like it doesn't, it could be technology, it could be, people, it could be, expanding, the realm of, the things that you understand. And so that's sort of how, and it's interesting. I always sort of share this with people who are new to Microsoft and in college who are sort of thinking about joining. I always tell them, I mean, look, it's such a phenomenal company because inherently the culture is so set up to support that movement, right? Like you could be working in Xbox one day, you could be designing Xbox Live and go to some office servers. You can come to Azure. You want to sort of build a device driver Windows, you can do that. I mean, it's just, and you could build a SaaS application in Dynamics. I mean, we have developers. I mean, it's just, there is almost nothing that you would want to do in software world that's not in Microsoft.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That's cool. Okay. A question that all in LATAM wants to know is, what can you tell us about the recent upgrades from Ignite?
The recent announcements are, a few things. I mean, I think one of the things we spoke about is if I had to sort of step back and look at, broadly, if you take a look at the Azure data and analytics strategy, right, we're focusing very heavily, on across, we have the portfolio of operational databases. So we've done a ton of work around SQL. So a couple of key announcements is, we have this whole hybrid investment that we've done. We announced it called Azure Arc at Ignite last year, 2019. And so this year we basically made substantial announcements for data services where the essential idea is, if you take a look at from a customer standpoint, a lot of times when they use Azure SQL Database, managed instance especially, they love the fact that there is so much of manageability that comes with it, right? You don't have to worry about high availability, disaster recovery, backup, patching, a bunch of stuff. But one constant thing we heard was, hey, but I want to sort of do that in my environment. I may want to do that on a different cloud. And so that was really the key, aspect of it. And so we got that into broad public preview. It's something that the team has been working on for a very, very long time. You can imagine, because the bar we set for ourselves was any environment, right? So you don't have to, and that essentially, raised the stakes quite a bit. And I'm sure we'll learn a lot more with the broad preview, as we get into general available. So that's this thing about Azure SQL Database Edge. It's, that went generally available. It's phenomenal. Like the whole SQL engine runs on a ARM device now, like a Raspberry Pi, 300 megabytes. So tiny, right? Like,
that is insane. It is
absolutely. It's. I think the team has done a phenomenal job. And the interesting part is if you take a look at the modern application paradigm, right? And sometimes people, when I tell them, they think like, hey, it seems like science fiction, but it's not, right? Like we have customers who, if you look at it, majority of the data in the next, let's say 5 to 10 years is going to be on these edge devices. Yeah. It's not in the cloud, right? Like if you look at, because a lot of the data is going to get filtered and sent to the cloud. So a lot of the pretty much everything you take a look at, connected cars, connected machines, a lot of decisions will be made on these edge devices. And that is the vision, because we said, look, if you're able to get SQL to work well on that, then from a developer standpoint or an administrator standpoint, it becomes so easy, right? It's the same T-SQL you're receiving to manage. All the extensibility work that you may be aware of, we did in SQL 2016, etc., that sort of came together. So that is something that I'm super excited about. On Cosmos DB side, we basically made a significant set of announcements. If you take a look at all the work we've done around the serverless capability with, you sort of auto scale, it's actually pretty amazing. And it's just been phenomenal to see, how many customers are sort of leveraging that. And it's super exciting. And a lot of work around enterprise readiness, like things like private link, Active Directory authentication. For Postgres and MySQL, like for the open source databases, we launched what's called the flexible server option, which effectively, if you think about it, you can use any VM, type that you have in Azure, and it natively runs on Linux. And it basically, some feedback we got in our past design was having the gateway layer in the middle was adding latency, so we reduced that. You get AZ support. It's actually just a complete rewrite, while maintaining all backward compatibility. So we're super excited about that. On Synapse Link, we were able to sort of, take that to more broader things. But you'll see, I'm, keeping my fingers crossed that very soon, at some point in the next, I don't know if I would share this broadly, but very soon, I'm looking forward to GAing Synapse.
That connection, Cosmos DB link and the Synapse and all kind of materials view and all the stuff is kind of
that's the man.
Really, yeah. It's really great.
Yeah.
It's insane.
I mean, just to unify the whole platform, because with Synapse, what I see at the enterprise client is that they can bring a whole platform all together in the same piece.
Correct.
And that kind of seamless connection between all the pieces all together to kind of have the orchestration, all the stuff at the moment that you have the output directly and to show directly, creating the data set directly from there to Power BI, it's kind of, yes, great work.
No, and I 100% agree with you, Aston. I think, again, like the principle that we've always taken is simplicity, right? Like, the system, especially when you look at cloud native designs, when you go from an SMP box to the scaled out architecture, there's a lot of, while you get a lot in terms of performance and scale and in cost and scaling up, scaling down, the challenge really that happens is there's a lot of complexity that's getting added when you go from like a single box. And I think that was the biggest thing that, with Synapse, as we brought together data integration, warehousing, big data analytics, the deeper integration that we're doing with Power BI. Literally, we're looking at the query plans coming out of Power BI and essentially making sure that Synapse is optimized for it, right? It's for the direct query model. And then with Link, right, we started off with Cosmos DB. We said, we're working on this with Postgres, SQL DB, of course. So if you want to sort of set up, your data from your operational store to land up in a columnar format to do analytics, you don't need to write any code. You just say, I want my data for analytics, and that's it. Right? It just, and it's going to be, we see with some of the largest customers, it's a complete game changer.
Yeah, sure. Well, Rohan, could you tell more about the challenges of being the engineering leader of the data platform team?
Yeah, I will say I do think I have the most fun job in the world. Just to get started. I know your question, Chris Paul, was about challenges, but it's amazing. You look at the amount of innovation that's happening in this data analytics space. It's absolutely like unbelievable, right? Every day you wake up
like
and
Disney World, right?
That's right. So, I think what I will say is, of course, the customer expectations are, as you think about cloud services and all that, there is some basic principles I'll tell you right from the very beginning. I remember when I came to the SQL Server team, our leaders at that time had essentially told me, there is one thing that all our engineers need to learn here. You never lose or corrupt data. That's just a no-no, right? So it's something that, it's almost ingrained into every engineer that comes into data, into the data organization. And so there's that sense of responsibility, right? When you look at making sure that the services are running, they're always available. You never run into, challenges in situations like that. So that's, just that fundamentals of quality, reliability, security, making sure that you always have the capacity to grow and scale. That, and frankly, the scale at which we've been growing, right? The cloud business has been growing. It's just been phenomenal. I've never seen anything like this. So that's the part which is, how do you ensure that, the customers are trusting us with so much. They're running their mission critical applications, how that works. And the other part, to be honest with you, is also sort of always, which I spend a lot of time is, obviously working with customers, learning from them and making sure that, we're always listening, right? We're always, paying attention. And because one of the best things about the cloud world is you see that every day you sort of see, literally where your services are not performing well to telemetry. And then finally, what I'd say is, just maybe looking across the corner to see, what else could be happening. So the Horizon 1, the next 1 to 2 years is very clear what we're investing in. Horizon 2 and 3, which is more like the next, let's say, 3 to 7 year time frame, is where we look at trends around, hey, what is it that, both from a hardware standpoint, software, like what are the disruptions that could potentially come? We partner very closely with a lot of hardware vendors. So, we have like, a whole process that we go through called the technical long range plan, where we look at, okay, 5 years from now, what is it that we should be doing now to make sure that, we stay ahead of the curve in terms of how, how things are happening. So I do land, working with the team on a lot of just that. We have a fantastic CTO in Raghu Ramakrishnan, who basically drives this process, working with the teams and, and manages this for us. But so that's the other part, which is, always sort of, staying ahead of the curve. But that's the thing, right? If you think about a lot of the innovation, just if you look at like 10 years ago, we were just an SMP engine that was competing, right? We were trying to become enterprise scale and all of that. And now when I look at just the portfolio, it just boggles my mind. So, I love my job and I'm super, grateful that I'm able to do this every day.
It's actually great to see how initially, as you said, it was SQL Server everywhere, and now it's become a real data platform, right? A big umbrella that covers everything. Of course, SQL Server is a big part of it, but yeah, absolutely. So before you were saying about SQL Server on Edge, right? So I'm, coming from many years, several versions of SQL Server, and I remember back in the time when people was asking me, hey, do you see SQL Server running on another platform that is not Windows Server? no, forget about that. It's not going to happen. Okay, and do you see SQL Server maybe running on a virtual machine? No. It's going to be on a bare metal server it has to be close to me, generating heat, right? So then, a couple of years ago, a great surprise seeing SQL Server running on Linux, right? Then, Edge, then the hybrid cloud. So it's literally that it's running everywhere, right? And with that change, we also have now the cloud that, as you say, seems like, it was 10 years ago in 6 months, and it's happening all so quickly. So how do you think, or how can you tell us that the cloud has changed the different data platform projects?
No, I mean, it's been a pretty foundational change. I think to your point, I think, one of the most interesting aspects of the innovation I look at is if you look at just the whole, what started off with relational databases, right? Like everybody said, well, most of the innovation is done. Like, what else are you going to change? And then, when cloud happened, almost everything got disrupted because foundationally, if you look at it, the architecture sort of became scale out, right? It wasn't just about, I can buy bigger and bigger machines, because the way the whole economics works out of the cloud is, we bet on, of course, these are powerful machines, but we bet on them at scale, right? So, and so the moment you do that, and so that's one trend, right, where architecturally things were changing quite a bit in the cloud. The other part was, if you just take a look at the volume of data, right? Previously, it was just line of business applications. Maybe you had your SAP system or this and that, right? Like, and the volume of what was considered high value data was not as big. Maybe like a terabyte, 10 terabytes. I mean, I remember the designs where you said, if you go more than 10 terabytes, you may need like this MPP system that And now, if you essentially look at, just yesterday, I was sort of speaking to a customer who's had finished uploading upwards of 200 terabytes into a single table in Synapse, and which is of course sharded across multiple nodes. And that's the other part. If you look at how the world is evolving, and I think this is one of the reasons why being in data and analytics and is so exciting, because it's funny. This is like in the last few years, I've noticed that data platform investments are board level conversations now, because every company, when you sort of speak to customers, is really looking into reinventing themselves. We want to become data driven. In fact, one of the things when I speak to customers, the questions they ask me is, how did Microsoft change? I mean, it's amazing. Like, obviously under Satya and the SLT's leadership, how did you evolve to become so data driven and so number? I mean, there's a huge amount of cultural transformation we went through as a company, but the underpinning value is, let's not just be opinion based, right? And I think that once you get into that foundational shift, and when you buy that, then suddenly you want to sort of just get all that data that you can access to, mix it together. And when you start thinking about predictive analytics, where you want to do machine learning and training and things like that, then the compute power sort of goes up, right? So almost every assumption got questioned. Mm-hmm. And I remember, I would say one of the hardest times for us was 2011 to 2016. It was almost like a blur, because we were pretty much every 6 months looking at, okay, we need to do that much. I mean, it was almost felt like we had to finish 1 year's worth of, progress in a week sometimes.
Okay, let's continue. This is a really, really great conversation, Rohan. Our audience from kind of different countries from LATAM, that they are kind of asking questions, and they are jumping with in Azure and Bar. It's like this. It's kind of interview, but with a lot of things going on in the back end, and in every session that we had in the past, in the last few sessions, everybody want to hear kind of stories like, okay, when you did that project, how was that? What was your main challenge there? What was your obstacle? How you learn about this? So the next move for you is tell us a little bit about any kind of story, about any kind of project that you did in the past that you can say, okay, this project was a cool one. That was a really good project, and I learned a lot from that one.
No, I mean, I tell you, there's so many. I'll it's funny because I worry I might pick one. I will to talk about. I think I remember, almost there's so many stories, right? Like if you take a look at just how Cosmos DB came about. I mean, it was just phenomenal to take a look at the beginnings of that. If you take a look at Hyperscale and SQL, if you take a look at, Synapse, what we did, our entry into open source, and so many discussions around, hey, will we ever have the credibility, how the market's going to perceive this? Will people think that we're not betting on SQL Server anymore? You can imagine strategically, so many questions you mentioned about SQL Server on Linux. Oh my God, there's a number of conversations we had internally, like, hey, how is this going to impact like the Windows business? You can imagine, right? Normal things like that. And one of the big things, it always has been an interesting learning, and is in all of these, I think one of the biggest learning for me is essentially is if you anchor yourself around what is it that the customers need, ignoring business models, ignoring, I'm not trying to downplay them. They're all important, and you have to worry because strategy is important. But it's something like where you always, whenever you face a difficult decision, I always do this: is just close your eyes and put yourself in the heart of a customer and like, what is it that's right for them? And you do that, you'll never fail. This is sort of like almost the litmus test that I always live by. And I'll tell you, Hyperscale is a great example. SQL, I'll tell you that story because I've sort of been involved with this from the beginning. You can imagine, right, when we pushed SQL DB, we essentially you either had local disk, which was up to 4 terabytes, and then or for standard databases you put remote, but we had constraints around the IOPS. So basically, how much can you scale? And I remember this was I guess maybe 3.5, 4 years ago, maybe even earlier than that. We had like one of our internal databases that started running into challenges where they basically were like, look, we're growing. We're clearly going to grow more than 4 terabytes. This was a time where it wasn't like the cloud adoption was all that great. Right now we have upwards of 6 million databases in SQL DB. And what became clear is we have to go solve this problem of scaling out storage while maintaining the app compat. And it was a huge, one of the things that I feel so grateful is just the phenomenal talent we have within the data organization. If you just take a look at, I feel blessed that we have literally of course I've been a Microsoft person all along, but I truly believe that we have one of the best teams in the world when it comes to data. Right, just in terms of the excellence, the passion, the creativity with which the teams they took that challenge on, and it was pretty crazy because literally if you look at the entire recovery stack, storage, access methods, almost everything had to be rewritten to sort of be more cloud native and to deal with failures which we basically would never expect in storage systems in the past, right? So. It's a long effort, and it was funny because that is one of the things when the team did a phenomenal job. Of course, we wrote a paper, it got accepted at SIGMOD, which is one of the best conferences that we have for database, data platforms in general. Bill Gates read that paper, and he basically reached out and said, "Wow, man, I can't believe it's so fantastic to see that our team has been innovating." And that's just one example. Look, I'll tell you, there's just so many stories like this in almost every area. I can tell you that with Cosmos DB, about Synapse. Like I said, about open source databases, all the work, frankly, we've done around, information management. It's one of the most unspoken for areas, because it's not like, the most, attractive or like, like the warehouse, etc. But foundationally, if you look at what our team has done with Azure Data Factory, it's just unbelievable. Like tens of petabytes, are being moved every day at record speeds. If you look at the data engineer experience that's built around that with data flows, it's phenomenal, right? And that, in some sense, was the anchor point of how we thought about the whole unified experience for Synapse. And, you just take a look at, what the team has achieved. So, yeah, there's so many stories. I'm sure I'm missing a few, but a lot of times, you go through hard decisions. You go through ways in which, because you always have to look at investments, right? There's, just like with every other company, sometimes, yes, Microsoft feels that it's big, but even in my role, I have to sort of look across and say, okay, what's the bet? Right? Where are we going to go all in? And it will fundamentally change the game.
Okay, that's a great story. You told us in a few questions and how you and all we all know how the technology changed in the last 5 years, and I ask you, where do you see the technology and heating in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, that's a great question. A few things I'd say. I do believe, like I said, the application paradigm is going to be a lot around this edge computing. I think is going to become very commonplace. So in that's one of the reasons. Like today, for example, we already have customers who are using SQL on the edge. All the work that we have done around IoT and Azure. It's one of our big success stories in terms of how customers are using that. In almost every vertical you can think about, right? Manufacturing, supply chain, etc. So the concept of the application model, as I think about the next, let's say 5-10 years, is going to be very, very different. I mean, almost everything around you is going to be connected. This data that's going to come out of, I mean, you see, right? Smart everything, smart refrigerators, smart microwaves, smart everything. And there's going to be a lot of ecosystem that's going to reliable ecosystems that are going to get built around it. So I actually do think just from a volume of data, that is going to be substantial. I do think a more verticalization of solutions is going to be critical, where more and more what I hear from customers is just the time to value, right? Look, I need to make a decision for my business. I need that insight now. Right, and we are not there yet. I mean, like truly, that's our vision with Synapse. That's really, if you look at Synapse Link, what we've done, the entire effort is around how do you significantly reduce the amount of time it takes to get to a decision.
Yeah.
Right? Especially for so that's one thing. I do think, for example, governance of data is going to be very critical, right? Like especially data privacy regulations. Europe has GDPR. I mean, America has CCPA. I mean, almost China, India, South America, every region is going to come with local requirements. Residency of data is going to be very, very critical. And that's going to be a huge challenge for enterprises. In fact, the chief data officer or the chief privacy officer has become a very important role. In many of the large companies, you see that. And I think a lot of that is because the regulation requirements are so strict. For example, if you violate GDPR, the fines that you pay, if you get audited and found is actually pretty significant, right? So if you're the CEO of the company or the senior leadership, you're going to put a lot of emphasis to make sure that you never have that happen. So I think that's an area which, obviously is very fundamentally how, we are sort of looking at how to approach that. And then, the other part is being Microsoft, one of the benefits that we have is we have Azure, of course, data, we have Dynamics, we have Microsoft 365, Power BI, Power Platform, and we're looking at ways in which we make our architecture be no cliff. So, for example, if you use customer insights in Dynamics, or you use Dynamics F&O, Power BI, it should be very seamless. This data models, like aligning around the common data model, the acquisition that we did, Aberdeen ADRM, which sort of gives you industry data models. You'll see, I mean, that's, as you can sort of imagine, that's going to be natively integrated. It's going to be a key part of Synapse in terms of, how we're sort of, approaching that. And so, yeah, I mean, so verticalization piece, governance of data, hardware innovation, I think if you take a look at what's happening with FPGAs and where we're going, like just the expectation around in some of the most sophisticated cases of predictive analytics are pretty huge. So that's another area I think that's, so my short thing I always tell my team is, like in our lifetime, there's not going to be any dearth of work to be done in this. Maybe even our kids.
Great.
Well,
thanks, Rohan.
Great answer. Well, I have other question for you.
Sure.
Rohan, please. Could you advise to Latin communities in terms of training, learning, and certification?
Yeah. So again, another good question. What I'd say is, the place where I see a lot of value being created is around that insights piece, right? More and more, my recommendation would be, like if you look at, so there is the classic, managing pipelines at scale, which has sort of always been there. But I actually think more and more our approach essentially, what the way we're taking it is, how do we commoditize data science? How do we essentially, what I mean by that is, how do we make it simple for a SQL developer, to sort of graduate into data science, right? That's really what we are working on, because I think without that simplicity, I don't think it's going to achieve the potential, right? Like, because today the whole notion is sort of too complex. And so what I'd say is, if there is any training around those aspects, like how do you gain, more than just the management piece, like how do you, right? There's things around how can I derive insights and how do I sort of, provide that value to the company? I think that's going to become more and more very, very much in demand. The other aspect is the governance piece that I truly think is very underserved right now. And it's not considered a problem, but like if I take a look at the next 6 months to 5 years, I definitely see there's going to be huge demand for personnel. So that's one of the things I'd say, right? Like I always sort of tell people, just keep looking out for where the value is getting created, right? Where is it? And then, a lot of times, some of these land up becoming things that are maturing, right? So it's not like you'll have everything, but if you look for, obviously, any of these conferences as they're coming out, look at those are early signals. The other thing I always say is look for startups, like look at where the investments are going, because the venture capital community always is thinking a little ahead in terms of what could change the game.
Okay, great. One of the things that we have seen in Ignite, and one of my favorite actually, was all the changes introduced in managed systems, right? Just being able to have more horsepower out of the box, well, out of the service, as we try to call it, and all the investment in machine learning, in integrating the SQL Pass offering with all the new innovations. We've been talking about some of the innovation and what we see ahead in terms of technology, but what can you tell us specifically about the data platform roadmap?
So a few things. What I'll say is, like you called out, Javier, I think obviously managed instance is a huge bet. So you'd see. And we're learning a lot through deployments. It's a pretty significant, business for us. Customers are loving managed instance, but as they're migrating, like one of the bars that the team has set for itself is every time they run into any friction, hey, something that needed to be changed, how do you go fix that? And some of these could be features inside the database, or some of these could be infrastructure things, right? How do you ensure that your virtual network is secured? You have Windows log on and things like that. So there's the approach you'll see constantly around managed instances around like, hey, how do we keep removing the blockers? The serverless work that we've done, we spoke about, SQL DB have serverless, Cosmos DB, you'll see that come to our open source databases. We basically see that's a foundational shift in the microservices architecture, as applications are getting built. So there you'll see a ton of innovation around that. Having machine learning be very close to all our data services, of course, Synapse, but pretty much everything is a huge focus, because even with existing line of business applications, right, we hear customers saying, hey, how can I get intelligence using machine learning very close to? So what we did with, SQL Server starting 2016, right, that's the part. All up, I'd say, if you take a look at, you should just expect deeper and deeper integrations with Synapse. You're going to have a broader ISV ecosystem there. We've spoken, I think, around, if I take a look at just the governance aspects, we're sort of looking into things and, how do we sort of share that? But yeah, just across almost everything, you'll see just every quarter or so, more and more new information coming up.
Okay, and talking about kind of, we know that in this kind of context, more than ever. Everybody is kind of thinking more than one time to switch careers, for example. And the next question is kind of, what is from your view, kind of your advice for someone that want to start a career in IT or switch career, or young people that start thinking about, okay, what my next move in college, or getting a new job, or starting with a new IT job?
Yeah, look, I actually just all up, if I take a look at, just this, having a, strong background in like computer science, IT, data science. I mean, these are just ever, it's interesting. You see this in starting salaries of, folks who come out of, college these days, right? It's a remarkable difference in terms of depending on the subject that you pick. And so, my advice would be, when I take a look at just this whole space around, applications, infrastructure, data platforms, data science, artificial intelligence. I mean, these are the things that are going to be super valuable in the future. So if you look at, back in like 90s, we'd spoken about just computer science, operating systems, networking. The abstraction level has moved up. So what cloud's done is a lot of what used to be the systems management piece, right? Hey, I need to hook up wires and this and that. A lot of that is going to get commoditized, and the values things are moving up. But clearly, when I take a look at the data platform, I'd say, looking for courses that around like business intelligence, data science, management of data, security, because that's going to become a big issue. Governance, understanding those dynamics and how that works, because every enterprise is going to need it.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
I think, Alex, maybe you're muted.
Yep, I think so.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's all.
I'm like a business application MVP, like I am. I want to know if you let us know how do you relate with different platforms like AI, data, low code, no code.
Yeah, I mean, like if you just take a look at the work, the whole low code, no code for especially application development is become like, it's taking off like wildfire, right? Like where, I mean, if you've seen the investments we've done around the Power Platform as an example, it's just been phenomenal to see. And you'll see like, we've started off with some of our data services in Azure where you can create a Power App very quickly. And the idea essentially is, like, how do we, have this notion of a citizen developer, right? Like where you don't have to have a lot of sophisticated knowledge, because a lot of purpose-built applications should be created just through drag and drop, right? And it's interesting because it completely changes the game, right? Like in terms of, you want something, you don't really need to be a very sophisticated programmer to sort of get a lot of those things. So I think it democratizes this whole application development in a pretty major way. Now, it's interesting, like if I take a look at some of the things we're looking at, is you look at, it's hard to create data applications, right? It's not easy today. If you take a look at, oh, did I get my query plan right? Did I this right, that right? And not that it basically, I mean, there's a certain amount of expertise and all that you would need always. But one of the things we're looking at is, what's the no-code experiences or low-code experiences we can get to our workflow? So Dataflows is a great example of what we did with ADF and what's in Synapse now.
Yeah.
Essentially where you have this canvas where you can basically drag and drop, declare what you want to do, and underneath the covers, code's being generated, right? It's like, it's amazing. Like, it's so universally loved. I mean, just by the community. And there's steps like that. So I think to, Alex's question, I do believe it's going to be more and more, we will see a lot more innovation happening in that space. It is obviously trickier on the data platform side, compared to, let's say, you just, building out like a web app or something like that, which maybe, somewhat with the logic maybe is a little less complex. But I do see, just given the power, because now all of a sudden think about it, right? Like anybody in the enterprise, will have the flexibility to create things which give them value of the data very quickly, which is not the case today.
Yeah, and again, that opens another conversation that is going to be the governance behind the scenes for that citizen developer world.
That's right.
That is coming.
That's right. How do you know? Like, I mean, that's a fantastic point. Gaston, what I'd say is, like, there has to be some way in which you manage all these applications.
Yeah.
How do you ensure that, the governance, like you called it, is secure, that they're not doing things which expose the enterprise to sort of risk. So there's always a balance. In fact, that I think it's interesting you mentioned that, because that is one of the pieces of feedback we hear from customers around, hey, I mean, this flexibility is great, but it always comes where you want to make sure that when it comes to security and things like that, and governance of data, you're not loosening or relaxing any of those things.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Rohan. Well, another question for you. After COVID, what do you think it's going to be the major change and challenges for IT folks? And what about community or events?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing is certain that when COVID happened, nobody knew, or at least I'd say nobody sort of, could foresee that, our working worlds just would turn upside down, right? I mean, it's been a little over, close to coming to 7 months now, where I think majority of the world, or at least the folks that I've sort of worked with, mostly have been working out of home, and the interesting learning essentially is that there are times when it is more efficient, right? There are times when there is the feedback that we've received from the teams essentially is, look, there are certain aspects of this, obviously there are, and people talk about missing that social interaction, being in person, and all that's true and valid. And of course, all the challenges with kids being at home and schooling and all that stuff. I'm sure all of us are facing that, or at least the ones who are dealing with young kids, I guess, are in a harder situation. But there's also this flexibility piece, right? Like you hear, hey, I get being at home gives me the flexibility to be with the family or take care of certain things or have lesser distractions. So I think foundationally one of the things I feel is there is as sort of we get past COVID, I think some of those benefits of what we've learned, I think, will continue. I think, there's, I do think work life has been knew it before COVID. I don't think we go back to completely that, or at least we don't have to if you don't, this thing is there. The other thing I would say is, from a customer standpoint, obviously it's been a pretty impactful thing for a lot of our customers and in economy and such. But again, this is where I always, I shared this with our team as well, where if you look at it, the conversations I have with customers sometimes is say, I wish I had started on the transformation journey sooner. I wish I had become a data-driven company, because they have to make hard choices now. They have to make choices. And if they had those insights that had guided their decisions through data, they could be making better choices, right? So I do think overall, while there's every customer conversation is around, how do I sort of, at least for the next few quarters, maybe save costs as I think about, can I maybe, prioritize some of the things towards my transformation that would help me save costs. But I think almost everyone I've spoken to, if anything, is more energized towards going through their digital transformation. And and they see that when these things happen, it's a non-linear impact, right? So customers who are very quick on their data culture, are getting the insights quickly and all that, will outperform their competition.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, Rohan, we are reaching the top of the hour and the final of this fun interview. We would like to take a few minutes to thank all the persons that have made this possible. Lani, Robin, Dee, and Rie, and many more for sure who help us to promote and distribute this event that we really were hoping for months and is finally becoming true. So thank you to all of them, definitely. And well, we give you the opportunity just to say a few closing words to the LATAM community.
again, like I mentioned in the beginning, thank you so much, for inviting me. It's, again, thank you for being such a core part of the Azure data family. Like I said, I think all of you, and I was sort of chatting with all of them before, and it's fantastic to see all the journey of how things have come together. And please, keep reaching out and giving us feedback. I can't sort of thank you enough for the trust you've placed. I know it's a lot of times, interactions like these, community feedback like this is what helps us make good products. So thank you.
So, Cristobal, do you want to close
sorry. Yes, sorry. Well, thank you all for participating. There are many people from all over Latin America. We make this chapter with great affection for everyone, where we have the opportunity to meet great exponent of technology. So thank you, Rohan, for staying with us here today. Please, Gaston, could you continue?
Yep, just a final message for the whole audience. We love to make these kind of events to learn, to share, to experience with all communities. We are so grateful for Rohan to take this moment to share with all of us. And this is kind of a scenario for everybody that they are thinking about ramping up the careers or up skills or learn more. So it's amazing that we had this opportunity to have Rohan at Azure in the bar again. So let's switch to Alex to close the session.
Okay, last words. Thank you for the time, Rohan. I hope you enjoy as we, and thank again. So see you all in 2 weeks. And okay, I'm going to change to Spanish again to say goodbye. Gracias a todos los que nos han acompañado esta tarde, noche, mañana. Sé que hay gente de todos lados del mundo, así que bueno, gracias de nuevo. Y bueno, espero que hayan disfrutado tanto como nosotros. Yo en toda la conversación no paraba de intentar pensar y ver cómo podía aprovechar más y más cada minuto de Rohan. Así que bueno, espero que todos hayan tenido esa misma sensación. Y bueno, en 2 semanas nos vemos de vuelta. Y bueno, gracias again.
Gracias a todos, nos vemos pronto.
Chao, chao.
Nos vemos.